In the year 530 BCE, the most powerful emperor in the world rode north with 200,000 soldiers. Cyrus the Great had never tasted defeat. His Persian Empire stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indus River. But waiting for him in the windswept steppes of Central Asia was a woman who would change history. Her name was Tomyris, and she was about to teach the mighty Cyrus that some queens don't bow to emperors. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we must first understand who Cyrus the Great was. By 530 BCE, he had built the largest empire the world had ever seen. He had conquered Babylon, defeated the Lydians, and subjugated countless peoples. Ancient sources called him the father of his people, a ruler so successful that even his enemies respected him. But Cyrus wasn't content. North of his empire, beyond the Caspian Sea, lay the steppes of Central Asia. These grasslands were home to the Massagetae, a fierce nomadic people who had never bent the knee to any empire. The Massagetae were different from the settled peoples Cyrus had conquered. They were nomads who lived on horseback, following their herds across endless grasslands. Their women rode horses, fought in battles, and could even rule as queens. And in 530 BCE, they were ruled by a woman who would prove more dangerous than any king Cyrus had ever faced. Her name was Tomyris. She had taken the throne after her husband's death, and she ruled with the wisdom of a diplomat and the ferocity of a warrior. What happened next would be recorded by the Greek historian Herodotus as one of the most dramatic confrontations in ancient history. Cyrus, ever the strategist, didn't immediately attack. Instead, he sent ambassadors to Queen Tomyris with an unexpected proposal: marriage. If she would become his wife, he would make her empress of the greatest empire on earth. But Tomyris was no naive queen. As Herodotus tells us, she was aware that it was her kingdom and not herself that he courted. She saw through Cyrus's diplomatic trap immediately. Her response was swift and cutting. She rejected his proposal and sent him a message: "Rule your own people, Cyrus, and leave mine to me." But she also issued a warning that revealed her understanding of what was truly at stake. According to Herodotus, Tomyris told Cyrus he could either withdraw his armies and rule his existing empire in peace, or cross into her lands and face the consequences. She offered him a choice: diplomacy or war. Cyrus chose war. He had never been defeated in battle, and he wasn't about to start respecting the threats of a nomadic queen. He began moving his massive army toward the river that separated Persia from Massagetae territory. But Tomyris had one more diplomatic move to make. She sent Cyrus a final warning: "If you do not withdraw in 3 days, I will attack." The Persian emperor had 3 days to reconsider. He ignored her completely. When those 3 days passed, Cyrus advanced. His army crossed the river into Massagetae territory, and immediately the Persians deployed a strategy that had worked for them countless times before: deception. The Persians set up camp, stocked it with provisions, and then staged a retreat. To the Massagetae scouts, it looked like the mighty Persian army was already running away. When the Massagetae advanced, they found what appeared to be a gift from the gods: an abandoned Persian camp filled with supplies. But there was one item that would prove catastrophic: wine. The Massagetae were a nomadic people who primarily drank fermented mare's milk. They had never encountered wine before. As Herodotus explains, they didn't understand its intoxicating power. Believing they had driven off the Persians, the Massagetae celebrated. They drank the wine, thinking it was just another beverage. But as they became intoxicated, they fell into the trap Cyrus had set. The Persians struck. The Massagetae warriors, drunk and disoriented, were easily overwhelmed. Most of the force was either killed or captured. Among the prisoners was someone who would change everything: Spargapisus, the son of Queen Tomyris. Cyrus had captured the queen's son through trickery, not honorable combat. But what happened next would transform a military campaign into a personal vendetta that would cost the Persian emperor everything. Ashamed of his capture and perhaps realizing the implications for his mother's kingdom, Spargapisus made a final request. He asked Cyrus for permission to end his own life rather than live in captivity. Cyrus granted the request, and with that decision, he sealed his own fate. Because when news of her son's death reached Queen Tomyris, the diplomatic phase of their conflict was over. Now it was personal. The message that reached Queen Tomyris was devastating. Her son was dead, killed by his own hand after being captured through Persian treachery. But instead of despair, it ignited something far more dangerous: a mother's fury. Tomyris sent Cyrus a message that Herodotus recorded for history. Her words burned with rage and promise of vengeance. "You bloodthirsty Cyrus, pride not yourself on this poor success. It was the grape juice which makes you mad when you drink it. It was this poison by which you ensnared my child, and so overcame him, not in fair, open fight. But then came the threat that would prove prophetic. Restore my son to me, and depart from this land unharmed, though you have wronged me by destroying a third of my army. Refuse, and I swear by the sun, the sovereign lord of the Massagetae, bloodthirsty as you are, I will give you your fill of blood. Cyrus read the message and dismissed it. He had faced the threats of kings and emperors. Why should he fear the words of a grieving nomadic queen? But he was about to learn that he had fatally underestimated his enemy. While Cyrus celebrated his victory, Tomyris was preparing for war. She rallied every warrior in her kingdom, calling upon clan chieftains and tribal leaders. This was no longer about defending territory. This was about avenging her son and proving that some peoples could not be conquered. The Massagetae prepared for battle as they never had before. They sharpened their battle axes, strung their bows, and prepared their horses for war. Herodotus tells us that they fought both on horseback and on foot, using lances and bows, but their favorite weapon was the battle axe. But their greatest weapon was their queen. Tomyris had transformed personal grief into a force that would unite her people for the fight of their lives. She had made a vow, and she intended to keep it. The battle that followed would be remembered by Herodotus as the fiercest conflict between non-Greeks in the ancient world. On one side stood the Persian army, 200,000 strong, disciplined, and led by a king who had never known defeat. On the other side stood the Massagetae, fewer in number but fighting for their homeland and their queen's honor. When the armies clashed, it was nothing like the battles Cyrus had fought before. The Massagetae didn't form neat lines or follow predictable tactics. They fought like the nomads they were, swift, fierce, and utterly unpredictable. The fighting was brutal. Herodotus describes warriors locked in close combat with lances and daggers, neither side giving ground. The Massagetae's superior horsemanship and knowledge of the terrain began to tell. But more than that, they were fighting with the fury of people who had been wrong, and leading them was Queen Tomyris herself. Ancient sources tell us she fought alongside her warriors, not from the safety of a command tent. She had promised to give Cyrus his fill of blood, and she was keeping that promise personally. As the battle raged, something unprecedented happened. The Persian army, which had conquered the known world, began to break. The Massagetae's ferocity, combined with their queen's leadership and their superior knowledge of mounted warfare, proved too much for even Cyrus's disciplined forces. And then, in the chaos of battle, the unthinkable happened. Cyrus the Great, the king who had never lost a battle, fell. The man who had built the largest empire in the world died on the steppes of Central Asia, killed by the people he had tried to conquer. When the fighting ended, the Persian army was shattered. Most of Cyrus's forces lay dead on the battlefield. The survivors fled south, carrying news that would shake the ancient world. Cyrus the Great was dead, and a nomadic queen had killed him. But Tomyris wasn't finished. She had made a specific promise to Cyrus, and she intended to keep it. Her warriors searched the battlefield until they found the Persian king's body and brought it to their queen. What happened next became one of the most famous acts of vengeance in ancient history. Tomyris ordered that Cyrus's head be cut off. Then she filled a skin with human blood and thrust the severed head into it. As she did this, Herodotus records her words, "I live and have conquered you in fight, and yet by you am I ruined, for you took my son with guile. But thus I make good my threat, and give you your fill of blood." It was a brutal act, but it was also a statement. Tomyris had shown the world that the Persian Empire was not invincible, that there were still peoples who could not be conquered, and that a mother's vengeance was a force more powerful than any army. The news of Cyrus's death sent shockwaves across the ancient world. The king who had seemed invincible was dead, killed by a queen most of his subjects had never heard of. The Persian Empire would continue, but it would never again seem quite as unstoppable. The story of Tomyris and her victory over Cyrus the Great echoed through history. Medieval artists painted her triumph, Renaissance masters sculpted her revenge, and writers across the centuries told and retold her tale. But what happened to Tomyris after her victory? History doesn't tell us. She vanished from the historical record as suddenly as she had appeared, leaving behind only only the legend of the queen who brought down an empire. Some scholars believe the Massagetae eventually became the Huns, who would later terrorize Europe. Others argue they were absorbed into other nomadic peoples, but their queen's moment of triumph remains clear. In 530 BCE, on the wind-swept steppes of Central Asia, a grieving mother proved that no empire is truly invincible. Tomyris showed the world that courage, determination, and the fury of a wronged parent could bring down even the mightiest of kings. She was Tomyris, queen of the Massagetae, the woman who gave Cyrus the Great his fill of blood, and she remains more than 2,500 years later one of history's most fearsome warrior queens.